Even though we're built to run, most of us can't handle the huge amount of stress that it puts on our bodies. Let me explain. When you're out running and your foot hits the floor, your muscles and tendons work together to absorb the impact and reduce your risk of injury, while also working as a spring to return some of that energy into your next step, propelling you forward. But here's the crazy bit. When you land, you're absorbing about 4 to 6 times your body weight, depending on your speed and technique. And because of that very energy efficient spring function, you take off with about 2 times your body weight. Now that works great if you're 18 and you weigh as much as a pillowcase, but if like me, you eat food, those numbers get big very quickly. At 230 pounds using this mathematics, my body has to absorb upwards of 920 pounds of pressure every time my foot hits the floor. And for reference, a grizzly bear has a bite force of 900 pounds. Now the muscles and tendons in your foot and calf have evolved to deal with that, at least in theory, acting as a bit of a natural shock absorber. But the reality of our environment, from office chairs to sofas, means most of us don't have the conditioning to handle that impact, and as a result of that, our injury risk skyrockets. No matter what your goal is, from losing weight to running a PB 5 kilometer or ultra, nothing ruins your progress quite like injury. So, is there any evidence to support that doing specific foot training actually reduces your risk of a running-related injury? Well, a couple of years ago, a group of researchers spent an entire year studying 118 runners trying to answer that exact question. Now, half of those runners were put on an 8-week training course focused on strengthening their foot and ankle muscles, followed by remote training for the rest of the year, and the other half just kept doing what they were doing. Now, both of these groups were monitored remotely and had to report all of their running related injuries. And unsurprisingly, the group that didn't do any foot and ankle strengthening exercises ended up having a 2.42 times higher risk of getting injured. When I first read that, I actually felt quite bad for the control group. It does seem obvious that doing something is going to be better than doing nothing, but when I kept reading, it got really, really interesting. When you really start digging into the data, it turns out that after the first 8 weeks, the difference in injury rate was almost negligible, with only a 2.75% reduction in injury. What really mattered was the compound effect of training consistently that decreased the risk by 20% for those doing foot and ankle strengthening. So it definitely sounds like if you want to run faster and more consistently with fewer injuries, then a bit of foot strengthening makes a lot of sense. So let's go through 5 exercises you can start implementing today. The last one is definitely my favorite. I definitely will give you a bit of an example as to how many repetitions and sets you can be doing for each of these exercises in the bottom of this screen like this. I'd also strongly recommend that you take your shoes off and do these exercises completely barefoot. It makes it much easier to activate all of those 29 muscles that make your foot and ankle move. So let's get into it. The first exercise is called the tib to calf raise, and having a wall can be quite helpful for it. It's aimed to mainly strengthen the muscles that go in front of your lower leg and over your foot and the muscles in your calf. First, lift the front of your feet as high as possible off the floor. You then want to be driving the toes down into the floor, reversing that movement, driving the heels as high as you can. You want to be doing this movement quite quickly, but under control, and you can build this one up to about 45 seconds for 3 sets through. You'll know you're doing it right when you feel the muscles on the front and the back of your shins getting quite tired. Over time, you might find yourself wanting to make this exercise tougher. Now, the first way to do that is to increase from 45 to 60 seconds and spend the first 30 seconds doing the calf raises with straight legs, and then the next 30 seconds doing the calf raises with slightly bent knees. When you do that, it helps separate something called your gastrocnemius and your soleus, which are the 2 muscles in the calf, and that will make it much, much harder. Eventually, you want to be able to do this on 1 leg at a time. The next exercise we're going to do while walking, and it's for strengthening your arch and the muscles that control your toes. I call it the grasp. Walking at quarter speed, you grasp your toes into the floor each time your foot hits the ground. Each step should be taking you around 3 seconds, so it's really important to do this one barefoot, and you just keep walking around like this for about 1 minute making sure that you're grasping your toes into the ground again for about 3 sets in total. If you're struggling to imagine what a grasp feels like, then take a tennis ball or an orange and just try and crush it in your hand. Exercise 3 is very similar to the last, but at the same time, it's the opposite. We call this one spreads. So instead of grasping your toes like you're trying to crush a tennis ball in your hand, you want to spread them like you're trying to drop a tennis ball, making sure that you're trying to release it each time your foot hits the ground whilst you're walking. You want to do this at a 1-to-1 ratio with the grasp, so if one movement is weaker than the other, work to that weaker side. Walking with some toe spacers in can be really useful here if you're struggling to separate your toes on your own accord, which is very normal if you've spent a long time wearing shoes with a very, very tight toe box. I did a whole video on toe spacers that I'll link up here. The next exercise that I'll show you makes all of what we've just done very, very relevant to running by combining all of those movements into a single complex stability exercise that engages all of the muscles that we've already talked about, plus some extras that are very relevant to running, like our hamstrings on the back of our leg, our hip flexors, and of course your extensor muscles as well. I call it a pendulum RDL, and for this you're going to ideally need a step and something that you can use for a little bit of support. What we're going to be doing is standing nice and upright with our feet flat on the ground. We're going to be splaying our toes out as much as we can and then gripping into the floor. Think of that cue of crushing a tennis ball. We're then going to be taken onto that wall for support, bringing the opposing knee up and into our body, and then we're going to be hinging forward at the hip, looking to feel that tension in the hamstring. Okay, so hinging forward at the hip, looking to feel that tension in the hamstring, and then coming back up to standing, knee pulls in and through. And the entire time we do that, we're looking to contract our toes into the floor as hard as we can. So without support, he says, without falling over, that would be knee up, toes squeezed into the floor, hinging forward, soft knee, looking for that tension in the hamstring, toes are still gripping the floor, and then coming back up to standing, knee pulled through. Very, very hard movement. There's a lot of moving parts there, so definitely make it easier by lightly using the wall for support, but this one is a real favorite of mine that I really, really recommend that you do. With that, we're looking for about 30 to 60 seconds work, again, about 3 times per leg. Now, those are the first 4 exercises, which are all great, but there is one big problem, and it's quite simply that they can be pretty boring to do, even though it's good for you and that it can help you run even more and even faster, and physio's telling you, and I'm telling you, and whoever's telling you to do it, which is why the last exercise that I want to show you isn't even really an exercise, and it's something you can do all day, every day, with little to no effort and huge potential kickback for your foot and ankle strength. Before I show you though, if you have been enjoying this video so far, make sure that you scroll down, make sure you press that like button, and while you're there, there is absolutely no harm in subscribing to the channel. Now, let me show you that last exercise. So what is the last exercise with little to no downside and huge benefit for your foot and ankle strength? Believe it or not, it's wearing shoes like these when you go about your day-to-day life. They're called Barefoot shoes, and unlike traditional running trainers, as you walk, your feet and ankles are actually forced to work the way that nature intended. Now, I'm not suggesting that you start running in them, and while you can, and there's no shortage of research to support that, the real benefit comes from day-to-day wear. With zero drop, a really nice wide toe box, and also minimal cushioning, the muscles in your feet and ankles have got to work really, really hard for stabilization and impact absorption all the time. But as you're walking, the impact force is significantly lower than when you're running, allowing for minimal risk of injury and maximal gain. The impact's actually so significant that researchers at the University of Liverpool found on average a 60% increase in foot strength after just 6 months of wearing barefoot shoes like these, the Primus Trails from a company called Vivo Barefoot. And even though it's anecdotal, these are the sole reason that I went from having to quit running due to very crippling knee and plantar fasciitis pain at 22 to happily running up to 40 kilometers each week now at 31 and 235 pounds. So yeah, I really do recommend exploring these some more as an easy way to improve your foot and ankle strength for running. The only downside is that you do need to be progressive to be able to wear them full time. So I'll link my barefoot transition guide somewhere up here in case you want some more information on what's involved, and I'll also leave a link to the Vivo Barefoot website and a discount code in the video description below. If you found this video helpful or interesting, it's always appreciated if you hit that subscribe button and like this video. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in another video again very soon.